Sarah Chen pressed her face against the cool metal of the observation window, watching the twin suns of Kepler 442b paint the alien landscape in shades of orange and purple. The colony of New Terra stretched below her, its white domed buildings gleaming like scattered pearls against the rust-colored ground. 3 years since humanity had established their first permanent settlement beyond Earth's solar system, and she still couldn't believe she was here. A soft mewing sound drew her attention away from the view. Whiskers, her gray tabby cat, rubbed against her legs with the demanding affection that only cats could master. Sarah reached down to scratch behind his ears, smiling as his purr rumbled through the quiet apartment. "What do you think, boy? Ready to meet your new little human?" she asked, one hand resting on her rounded belly. At 8 months pregnant, Sarah found it increasingly difficult to bend down to pet Whiskers properly. But the cat didn't seem to mind. He had been her constant companion since before the journey to Kepler 442b, one of the few Earth animals approved for the colonial mission. The door chimed, and Sarah's husband David entered, his face flushed with excitement. His work uniform still bore traces of the red dust that covered everything on this world, despite the colony's advanced air filtration systems. The medical bay confirmed it, David announced, pulling Sarah into a careful embrace. "Dr. Martinez says everything looks perfect. 2 more weeks, maybe 3, and we'll have our little explorer." Sarah leaned into his warmth, feeling the baby kick as if responding to its father's voice. "I can't wait to see who this little one becomes. The first human baby born on Kepler 442b. David's expression shifted slightly, a shadow crossing his features. "Speaking of that, I had another conversation with Elder Zorvac today. He seemed concerned about Whiskers." Sarah pulled back, frowning. Elder Zorvac was the leader of the Kethmori, the indigenous species that had welcomed humanity to their world with surprising openness. Standing nearly 7 feet tall with smooth, bluish-gray skin and large, intelligent eyes, the Kethmori resembled nothing so much as oversized dolphins that had learned to walk upright. Their culture valued harmony and cooperation, which had made the establishment of New Terra remarkably peaceful. "What kind of concerns?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The same ones he's mentioned before. The Kethmori have some very strong beliefs about feline creatures and young offspring. They think it's dangerous to have Whiskers around the baby." Sarah glanced down at Whiskers, who had sprawled across her feet and was now grooming his paw with typical feline indifference to the conversation. "Whiskers wouldn't hurt a fly. He's the gentlest creature I've ever known." "I know that, and you know that," David said, running a hand through his dark hair. "But the Kethmori have their own experiences." Zorvac mentioned something about the hunting instincts in small, vulnerable creatures. He was quite insistent that we keep Whiskers away from the baby, especially during the first few months. The suggestion made Sarah's chest tighten with unexpected anxiety. Whiskers had been her emotional anchor during the long journey from Earth, helping her cope with homesickness and the stress of adapting to their new world. The idea of separating him from the family felt wrong on a fundamental level. "Did he explain why their beliefs are so strong about this?" Sarah asked. David shook his head. "He got that look he gets when he's talking about something culturally sensitive. You know how the Kethmori are about sharing certain traditional knowledge with outsiders. He just kept saying it was for the safety of the young one and that some hunting bonds run deeper than domestication." Sarah moved to the kitchen area, Whiskers following with his tail held high. She opened a container of the specially formulated cat food that had been shipped from Earth at enormous expense. As Whiskers crunched contentedly, she considered the situation. The relationship between humanity and the Kethmori had been built on mutual respect and careful cultural sensitivity. The aliens had allowed humans to establish New Terra in exchange for sharing Earth's technological advances in water purification and sustainable energy. It was a delicate balance, and Sarah understood the importance of maintaining good relations with their hosts. But this felt different. This felt personal. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I said we'd consider his advice carefully," David replied diplomatically. "I didn't want to dismiss his concerns outright, but I also didn't want to make any promises about Whiskers." As if sensing he was the topic of conversation, Whiskers finished his meal and padded over to Sarah. He sat at her feet and looked up at her with those wide green eyes that seemed to see right through her. Then, in a gesture that never failed to amaze her, he gently placed one paw on her belly. The baby immediately responded with a series of kicks, as if recognizing its feline friend. Sarah had noticed this phenomenon throughout her pregnancy. Whenever Whiskers was near, the baby became more active, almost playful. Dr. Martinez had mentioned it was probably just coincidence, but Sarah wasn't so sure. "Look at him, David," she said softly. "Does this look like a dangerous predator to you?" David crouched down beside them, watching as Whiskers began to purr, his paw still resting on Sarah's belly. The baby's movements seemed to sync with the cat's purring, creating a rhythm that felt almost like communication. "No," David admitted. "But we have to be smart about this, Sarah. We're guests on this world, and the Kethamori have been generous hosts. If they have concerns about our safety, maybe we should listen." "Or maybe," Sarah said, a stubborn edge creeping into her voice, "they don't understand the relationship between humans and their companion animals. The Kethamori never developed the same kind of domestication that we did on Earth. They might not realize how much our animals have evolved alongside us." The conversation was interrupted by another chime at the door. David checked the security screen and frowned. "It's Dr. Rodriguez from the Xenobiology Department, and she's with someone I don't recognize." When David opened the door, Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered with a tall, thin human man wearing the gray uniform of the Colonial Science Division. His pale eyes swept the apartment with clinical interest before settling on Whiskers. "Sarah, David," Dr. Rodriguez said, her usual warm demeanor notably absent. "This is Dr. Marcus Webb from the Behavioral Sciences Unit. He's been studying the concerns raised by the Kethamori leadership about your situation." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his gaze still fixed on Whiskers. "I understand you're planning to keep the feline in close proximity to your newborn child, despite clear warnings from our hosts. I'm here to strongly advise against that course of action." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the apartment's climate control. "Why? What exactly are you and the Kethamori so afraid of?" Dr. Webb pulled out a sleek data tablet and activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. The blue-tinted projection showed what appeared to be a creature similar to Whiskers, but larger and more feral-looking, with pronounced fangs and claws. "This is a Kethamori historical record of what they call a shadow claw," Dr. Webb explained, his voice taking on the tone of a lecture. "These creatures were native to Kepler 442b until about 2,000 years ago. They were apex predators with a particular hunting strategy that the Kethamori found traumatic." Sarah watched the holographic creature prowl silently through what looked like an ancient Kethamori settlement. Even in the projection, there was something unsettling about the way it moved, with a fluid grace that suggested deadly purpose. The shadow claws would integrate themselves into Kethamori family units. Dr. Webb continued. They were intelligent enough to mimic helpful behaviors, even appearing to bond with adult Kethamori. But they were actually waiting for the most vulnerable moment to strike. The hologram shifted to show a cross-section of a Kethamori dwelling. The shadow claw lay curled beside what appeared to be a juvenile Kethamori, looking peaceful and protective. Then the scene changed, and Sarah had to look away as the creature's true nature was revealed. "They specifically targeted the young," Dr. Rodriguez added quietly. "The Kethamori nearly went extinct because of these creatures. It took centuries of warfare to eliminate them completely." David moved closer to Sarah, his hand finding hers. That's horrible. But Whiskers isn't one of these shadow claws. He's a domestic cat from Earth." Dr. Webb deactivated the hologram and fixed them with a stern look. "Dr. Chen, Mr. Chen, I understand your attachment to your pet, but you have to understand the psychological impact this is having on our hosts. When they see your cat's behavior around your unborn child, it triggers deep cultural trauma. Some of the elder Kethamori are beginning to question whether humans can be trusted to coexist peacefully." Sarah felt anger bubbling up inside her. "So we're supposed to abandon our family member because of their ancient fears? Whiskers has never shown any aggression toward anyone, Kethamori or human. That's exactly what makes this situation so concerning to them," Dr. Webb replied. "The shadow claws were master manipulators. They could suppress their hunting instincts for months, even years, until the perfect opportunity presented itself." Whiskers, as if sensing the tension in the room, jumped onto Sarah's lap and settled himself carefully across her belly. His purring was loud in the sudden silence, and once again, the baby began to move in response. Dr. Rodriguez watched this interaction with troubled eyes. "Sarah, I've known you since before we left Earth. I know how much Whiskers means to you. But we're not just talking about your family anymore. We're talking about the future of human-Kethmori relations. If something were to happen, nothing is going to happen, Sarah said firmly. You're asking me to treat my cat like a monster based on the behavior of a completely different species that went extinct 2,000 years ago. Dr. Webb stepped forward, his expression softening slightly. I'm not asking you to get rid of your cat permanently, just during the first few months of the baby's life, until we can prove to the Kethmori that there's no danger. And how exactly do we prove that? David asked. What kind of test would satisfy them? Time, Dr. Webb replied. If nothing happens for 6 months, maybe a year, the Kethmori leadership believes their fears will be proven unfounded. Sarah shook her head vigorously. A year? You want me to separate Whiskers from our family for a year based on superstition? It's not superstition when it's based on actual historical experience, Dr. Rodriguez interjected. The Kethmori aren't being unreasonable, Sarah. They're trying to protect your child based on their knowledge of predator behavior. The room fell silent except for Whiskers' contented purring. Sarah looked down at her cat, really studied him. His green eyes were half closed in contentment, his paws kneading gently against her belly. Everything about his body language spoke of love and protection, not predation. Has anyone actually studied the differences between Earth cats and these shadow claws? Sarah asked suddenly. Dr. Webb consulted his tablet. Some preliminary comparisons have been made. There are certain physical similarities, but the behavioral analysis has been limited. Limited how? Well, we've only observed your cat's interactions with adult humans. The Kethmori are specifically concerned about his behavior around infants. Sarah felt a spark of inspiration. Then let's do a proper study. Bring in some of the other families with cats. Let the Kethmori observers watch how our animals interact with human children. Dr. Rodriguez frowned. Sarah, there are only 3 other cats in the entire colony, and none of the other families have young children. So we wait, David said, understanding his wife's thinking. We document everything. Every interaction between Whiskers and the baby once it's born. Full video monitoring, behavioral analysis, the works? Dr. Webb looked skeptical. The Kethmori aren't going to be satisfied with human analysis of human pets. They'll want their own behavioral experts involved. Fine, Sarah said, her chin lifting defiantly. Let them observe. Let them bring their best experts. But I'm not separating my family based on fear and incomplete information. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, causing Sarah to gasp. Whiskers immediately lifted his head, his ears alert, and gently moved his paw to a different spot on her belly. The baby's movements calmed almost instantly. All 4 adults stared at this interaction. Even Dr. Webb seemed taken aback by the obvious communication between cat and unborn child. How long has he been doing that? Dr. Rodriguez asked quietly. Since about the 4th month of pregnancy, Sarah replied. He seems to know exactly where the baby is at any given time, and he can calm the movement when I'm uncomfortable. Dr. Webb made notes on his tablet, his expression thoughtful. This is unusual behavior for a typical house cat. Not really, David said. Cats have been documented responding to human pregnancy for centuries on Earth. They're sensitive to hormonal changes, body temperature variations, even heartbeat patterns. But this level of apparent communication... Dr. Webb trailed off, then looked up sharply. Have you noticed any other unusual behaviors from your cat since arriving on Kepler 442b? Sarah and David exchanged glances. There had been something different about Whiskers since they'd arrived on the alien world, though Sarah had attributed it to the stress of relocation and the different environment. He's more alert, Sarah said slowly, more focused, and sometimes he stares at things that aren't there, at least not that we can see. Things like what? Empty spaces in the air, corners of rooms where nothing is happening. Sometimes he follows movement that we can't detect. Dr. Webb and Dr. Rodriguez shared a meaningful look that made Sarah's stomach tighten with unease. What? She demanded. What aren't you telling us? Dr. Rodriguez sighed heavily. There's something else about the shadow claws that we haven't mentioned. According to Kethmori records, they weren't just physically dangerous. They had some kind of sensory ability that the Kethmori could never fully understand. What kind of ability? They could perceive things that the Kethmori couldn't, Dr. Webb said reluctantly. Energy signatures, dimensional fluctuations, threats that existed beyond normal sensory range. The Kathmori believe that's what made them such effective predators. Sarah's hand instinctively went to Whiskers' head, stroking his soft fur. Are you suggesting that Whiskers has some kind of supernatural ability? Not supernatural, Dr. Webb corrected, but possibly enhanced sensory capabilities that have been activated or amplified by exposure to this world's unique electromagnetic environment. The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. If Whiskers was developing abilities similar to the Shadow Claws, it could explain the Kathmori's deep concern. But it could also mean something entirely different, something that might change everything they thought they knew about the relationship between humans and their animal companions. 2 weeks later, Sarah held her daughter for the first time. Emma Chen came into the world with a healthy cry that echoed through the medical bay, her tiny fists waving as if she was ready to take on the entire universe. As Dr. Martinez placed the baby in Sarah's arms, Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of love and protection that she'd never experienced before. David leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face as he gently touched Emma's tiny fingers. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Through the medical bay's window, Sarah could see Whiskers sitting in the hallway, his green eyes fixed on the door. The nursing staff had refused to allow him inside during the delivery, but somehow he'd known exactly when to arrive. He'd been sitting in that same spot for 3 hours, as motionless as a statue. "Can we bring him in?" Sarah asked Dr. Martinez. "Just for a few minutes." The doctor hesitated, glancing toward the observation room where several Kathmori officials waited alongside Dr. Webb and Dr. Rodriguez. "The observers want to document the first interaction. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Sarah looked down at Emma, who had quieted and was now staring up at her with those unfocused eyes that all newborns possessed. Something deep in her maternal instincts told her that this moment was important, not just for her family, but for something much larger. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let them in. All of them." David squeezed her hand. "Are you sure? We could wait until you've had more time to recover." "No. If we're going to prove that Whiskers isn't a threat, we need to do it honestly. No hiding, no controlled conditions. Just the truth." Dr. Martinez nodded and spoke into her communicator. Within minutes, the room filled with observers. Elder Zorvak entered first, his tall blue-gray form moving with the fluid grace characteristic of his species. His large, dark eyes immediately fixed on the baby in Sarah's arms, and she saw something she'd never noticed before in his expression. A deep, ancient sadness. Behind him came 2 other Kathmori that Sarah didn't recognize, followed by Dr. Webb and Dr. Rodriguez. The room suddenly felt very crowded, but Sarah was determined to go through with this. "Please," Elder Zorvak said in his melodious voice, the translator device on his chest converting his words into perfect English. "We mean no disrespect to your family moment. But if the small predator is to be near your offspring, we must observe." Sarah noticed that he called Whiskers a small predator rather than using the word pet or companion. It was a reminder of how different their species' relationships with animals truly were. "Dr. Martinez, would you please ask someone to bring Whiskers in?" Sarah requested. The door opened and Whiskers entered with his typical feline dignity. He didn't rush or show any signs of excitement. Instead, he moved slowly and deliberately across the room, his eyes never leaving the bundle in Sarah's arms. Every Kathmori in the room tensed visibly, their large eyes tracking his movement with obvious anxiety. Whiskers approached the bed cautiously, then sat down beside it. He looked up at Sarah, then at David as if asking permission. When Sarah nodded, he carefully placed his front paws on the edge of the bed and stretched his neck to peer at the baby. The moment his eyes met Emma's, something extraordinary happened. Emma, who had been fussing slightly, became completely still. Her tiny hand moved toward Whiskers, and though she couldn't have had the coordination for such a deliberate action, her fingers seemed to reach specifically for him. Whiskers lowered his head until her hand could just touch his fur, and when contact was made, he began to purr. But this wasn't his normal purr. The sound was deeper, more resonant, almost musical. It filled the room with a vibration that seemed to calm everyone present. Even the Kathmori observers appeared to relax slightly, their tense postures softening. But what happened next made everyone in the room gasp. A soft, golden light began to emanate from the point where Emma's hand touched Whiskers' fur. It was subtle at first, barely visible, but it grew stronger until it surrounded both the baby and the cat in a warm, gentle glow. Elder Zorvak stepped forward, his translator crackling with his rapid speech. Impossible. The energy signature. It cannot be. Dr. Webb frantically took readings on his instruments, his eyes wide with disbelief. I'm detecting electromagnetic fluctuations unlike anything we've recorded. The energy it's not coming from the cat alone. Sarah looked down at her daughter in amazement. Emma's eyes, which should have been unable to focus properly at her age, were locked onto Whiskers with clear intelligence. And Whiskers was staring back with an expression that transcended typical animal awareness. What's happening? David asked, though his voice held wonder rather than fear. One of the Kethmori observers began speaking rapidly in their native language, causing Elder Zorvak to turn sharply toward them. A heated discussion ensued, with clicking and whistling sounds that the translator couldn't process fast enough. Finally, Elder Zorvak turned back to the humans, his expression completely transformed. Honored Sarah, honored David, we have been gravely mistaken. Your small companion is not a predator. He is something we thought lost to this world forever. What do you mean? Sarah asked, though she kept her voice soft to avoid disturbing the incredible moment between Emma and Whiskers. The Shadow Claws were not the only creatures with enhanced senses on Kepler 442b. Elder Zorvak explained, his formal tone giving way to excitement. There were others, benevolent creatures we called lifebinders. They formed symbiotic relationships with young Kethmori, helping them develop their natural abilities and protecting them from harm. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. What happened to them? They died out during the same period as the Shadow Claws. We believed it was because they were too similar, that the war against the predators had claimed the protectors as well. But perhaps, he paused, studying Whiskers intently. Perhaps they did not die. Perhaps they left. The golden light around Emma and Whiskers pulsed gently, and Sarah felt a warmth spread through her entire body. It was like being wrapped in love itself, a sensation of complete safety and protection. Left for where? David asked. Elder Zorvak's large eyes fixed on him. For Earth. Following some call we could not hear, seeking species that could truly bond with them. Your humans and your cats did not simply domesticate one another through normal evolution. You formed something deeper, a symbiotic relationship that has been growing stronger for thousands of years. Dr. Webb looked up from his instruments, his face pale with realization. The energy readings, they're not just coming from the cat or the baby individually. They're coming from the connection between them. It's like they're sharing some kind of neural network. Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks as she watched her daughter and Whiskers continue their silent communication. Is this why cats have always been drawn to pregnant women? Why they seem to know things about babies that we don't? It is possible, Elder Zorvak said softly. Your species may have been unconsciously nurturing the lifebinder abilities for millennia, not knowing what you were preserving. One of the other Kethmori stepped forward and spoke urgently to Elder Zorvak. His expression immediately became serious. What is it? Sarah asked, instinctively holding Emma closer. Honored Sarah, if your companion truly carries lifebinder essence, then his presence here is not coincidence. The lifebinders only revealed their abilities when there was great need for protection. Elder Zorvak paused, his gaze moving to the window that showed the alien landscape beyond. We must ask ourselves, what danger has he sensed that we have not? As if responding to his words, Whiskers suddenly lifted his head, his ears pricking forward. The golden light around him and Emma intensified, and he let out a low, warning growl that Sarah had never heard from him before. Outside, the twin suns of Kepler 442b were setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and orange. But in the distance, something was moving against the darkening horizon, something that shouldn't have been there, something that the colony's sensors had completely failed to detect. The colony's emergency sirens began wailing just as Whiskers' growl reached its peak intensity. Through the medical bay's reinforced windows, Sarah could see shapes moving across the distant hills, shapes that defied the evening shadows and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Elder Zorvak immediately activated his communication device, speaking rapidly in the Kethmori language. His companions responded with urgent clicking sounds, their usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious alarm. What are those things? David demanded, still holding Sarah's hand as she clutched Emma protectively. Void touched, Elder Zorvak replied grimly. We thought they were legend, stories told to frighten younglings. Creatures from the spaces between dimensions that feed on life energy itself. Dr. Webb's instruments were screaming with readings as he frantically tried to process the data. I'm detecting massive electromagnetic distortions, energy signatures that don't match anything in our databases. Whatever those things are, they're not fully present in our dimensional space. The golden light around Whiskers and Emma pulsed brighter, and Sarah realized that her cat wasn't just sensing the approaching threat. He was actively protecting her daughter from it. She could feel it now too, a cold pressure in the air that seemed to press against her mind, trying to drain something vital from her very being. How long has it been since you've seen these creatures? Dr. Rodriguez asked Elder Zorvak, never in living memory. The last recorded sighting was over 3,000 years ago, during the time of the Great Dying. Our ancestors believed the Lifebinder's sacrifice drove them away permanently. Sacrifice? Sarah asked, fear gripping her heart as she looked down at Whiskers. The Lifebinders gave their life essence to create a barrier around our world, sealing the dimensional rifts that allowed the void touch to enter our reality. It should have been permanent. Elder Zorvak's large eyes turned to Whiskers with new understanding. Unless something has changed the dimensional structure of our space. Dr. Webb looked up sharply from his readings. The human colony. Our ships, our technology. We've been generating quantum field fluctuations that could have weakened an existing dimensional barrier. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Humanity's arrival on Kepler 442b hadn't just established a new colony. It had inadvertently broken an ancient protection that had kept these energy-draining creatures at bay for millennia. We're responsible for this, David said quietly, his voice heavy with guilt. Knowledge without intent carries no blame, Elder Zorvak replied with characteristic Kethmori wisdom, but responsibility for solutions that we all share. Through the window, the void-touched creatures were getting closer. In the dim light, Sarah could see they moved like liquid shadow, flowing across the landscape with unnatural speed. Where they passed, the hardy alien vegetation withered and died, leaving trails of gray devastation behind them. Whiskers suddenly leaped onto the bed, positioning himself directly over Emma. The golden light around them both intensified until it was visible, even in the room's bright artificial lighting. Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation, as if energy was flowing between her daughter and her cat, creating some kind of protective field. The baby. One of the Kethmori observers said suddenly, the infant carries pure life essence. She is not yet fully anchored to this dimension. The void touched will be drawn to her above all others. Sarah's protective instincts flared. Then we need to get her away from here. Evacuate the colony, take the ships back to space until these things leave. They will follow, Elder Zorvak said grimly. Void touched can travel between dimensions. Distance in normal space means nothing to them. And now that they have detected the pure essence, he gestured toward Emma, still glowing softly in Whiskers' protective embrace. They will not stop until they have consumed it. Dr. Webb's communication device crackled to life with urgent voices from the colony's command center. The creatures had reached the outer perimeter defenses, and conventional weapons were proving completely ineffective. Energy blasts passed right through them, and physical barriers offered no resistance to their interdimensional nature. What stopped them before? David asked desperately. You said the Lifebinders created a barrier. How? Through sacrifice of life essence, Elder Zorvak repeated. But such a barrier would require the willing participation of dozens of Lifebinders, perhaps hundreds. Your companion, though powerful, is only one. Sarah looked down at Whiskers, who was purring intensely while maintaining his protective stance over Emma. His green eyes met hers, and in that moment, she understood something that transcended species barriers. He wasn't afraid. He was ready to do whatever was necessary to protect her daughter, even if it meant giving his own life. No, she said firmly. There has to be another way. Dr. Rodriguez had been quietly studying the energy readings on Dr. Webb's instruments. Wait, she said suddenly. Look at these patterns. The energy isn't just coming from the cat or the baby. It's flowing between them, amplifying each time it cycles through their connection. What are you thinking? Dr. Webb asked. Symbiosis. Elder Zorvak said the Lifebinders formed symbiotic relationships with young Kethmori. What if the protective barrier doesn't require sacrifice? What if it requires partnership? Elder Zorvak's eyes widened. You suggest that the infant could contribute her life essence willingly to the barrier? Not willingly, Sarah said, understanding dawning. Naturally, babies don't think about giving or holding back energy. They just exist in a state of pure life force. If Whiskers can channel that energy instead of using his own, it could work, Dr. Webb said excitedly. The energy readings show their connection is already stable and amplifying. If we could find a way to extend that field colony-wide. Through the window, the void-touched creatures had reached the colony's outer buildings. Sarah watched in horror as the creatures passed through walls like they were made of mist. Entering structures where families were sheltering, screams began to echo across the colony as people encountered the energy-draining touch of the interdimensional predators. We're out of time, David said. If this is going to work, it has to happen now. Elder Zorvak stepped forward. Honored Sarah, if you and your companion are willing to attempt this, the Kethamori will provide what assistance we can. We have ancient knowledge of energy channeling that might help amplify your daughter's natural essence. Sarah looked at her husband, then down at Emma, who was still calmly staring at Whiskers as if this were the most natural thing in the world. What do you need us to do? Trust, Elder Zorvak said simply. Trust in the bond between your species and your companions. Trust that evolution guided you together for this very purpose. Whiskers meowed softly, a sound that somehow conveyed both determination and reassurance. The golden light around him and Emma began to pulse in rhythm with the baby's heartbeat, and Sarah realized that her daughter's first great adventure was about to begin. Outside, the void-touched creatures were systematically moving through the colony, their hunger for life essence drawing them inevitably toward the medical bay, toward Emma, toward the purest source of life energy they had encountered in 3,000 years. But they would have to get through Whiskers first, and as Sarah was beginning to understand, that might prove to be more difficult than they imagined. The medical bay's lights flickered as the first void-touched creature passed through the exterior wall. Sarah felt its presence like ice water in her veins, a numbing cold that seemed to drain the warmth from the very air. The creature was barely visible, more of an absence than a presence, a moving shadow that bent light around its edges. Elder Zorvak and his companions immediately formed a protective circle around Sarah's bed, their large hands weaving complex patterns in the air. Sarah could see energy flowing between their fingers, creating a shimmering barrier that made the approaching creature hesitate. We cannot hold them long, Elder Zorvak said through gritted teeth. Kethamori energy is too different from what they seek. They will bypass us soon. Whiskers had gone completely still above Emma, his purring now so deep it was felt rather than heard. The golden light around them both had condensed into a tight cocoon of protection, but Sarah could see more void-touched creatures pressing against the building's walls, drawn by the pure life essence radiating from her daughter. Tell me what to do, Sarah said to Elder Zorvak, her voice steady despite her fear. You must open yourself to the connection, he replied, his concentration making his words careful and precise. Human mothers share life essence with their young for months before birth. That connection has not ended, it has only transformed. If you can consciously channel your energy through your daughter to your companion— I don't know how, Sarah interrupted. I'm not telepathic or psychic or whatever this requires. You are a mother, Elder Zorvak said simply. That is all the ability you need. Dr. Webb, still frantically monitoring his instruments, looked up with excitement. Sarah, your stress hormones, your protective instincts, they're already creating a sympathetic energy resonance with Emma. Your maternal bond is literally generating the same frequency as the life-binder connection. The void-touched creature testing the Kethamori barrier suddenly abandoned its cautious approach and lunged forward. Elder Zorvak stumbled backward as the creature passed through his energy field like it was smoke, its attention fixed entirely on Emma. Whiskers reacted instantly. His body expanded, fur standing on end, and he let out a sound that was part hiss, part roar, and part something entirely inhuman. The golden light around him flared so brightly that everyone in the room had to shield their eyes. The creature stopped, its shadowy form rippling with what might have been surprise. For the first time since they'd appeared, one of the void-touched had been forced to halt its advance. It's working, Dr. Rodriguez breathed. The protective field is actually affecting it. But Sarah could see the strain on Whiskers. His small body was trembling with effort, and she realized he was drawing on his own life force to maintain the barrier. She wouldn't let him sacrifice himself for her daughter. Emma, she whispered, looking down at her baby. Mommy needs your help, sweetheart. Sarah reached out and placed her hand gently on Whisker's back, right where Emma's tiny fingers were still touching his fur. The moment all three of them were connected, the world exploded into sensation. Suddenly, Sarah could feel everything Whiskers felt. His fierce determination to protect Emma, his love for their family, his awareness of threats that existed beyond normal perception. She could sense the void-touched creatures not just as shadows, but as hungry voids in the fabric of reality itself, desperate to consume the life energy that would allow them to fully manifest in this dimension. And through Emma, she felt something even more extraordinary. Her daughter's consciousness wasn't the blank slate that humans assumed newborns possessed. It was vast and open, connected to patterns of energy that flowed through the entire planet. Emma could sense every living thing within miles. The colonists huddling in their homes, the Kethmori using their energy to provide what protection they could, even the alien plants and microorganisms that made up Kepler 442b's ecosystem. I can feel all of them, Sarah gasped. Everyone in the colony. Everything alive on this world. That is the true gift of the Lifebinders, Elder Zorvak said with wonder. Not just protection for one, but connection to all. Channel that connection, honored Sarah. Let it flow through your companion and out into the world. Sarah closed her eyes and stopped fighting the overwhelming sensations. Instead, she embraced them, letting her mother's love for Emma expand to encompass everyone she could feel through their connection. The golden light around Whiskers began to spread, flowing like liquid energy across the floor, through the walls, and out into the colony beyond. Where the light touched people, Sarah felt their fear transform into calm determination. The colonists who had been helplessly hiding began to move with purpose, helping their neighbors, sharing their strength. The Kethmori guards found their energy barriers becoming stronger and more stable. But most importantly, the void-touched creatures began to recoil. They cannot feed on shared energy, Elder Zorvak explained, his voice filled with awe. The void-touched consume isolated life essence, but when that energy is freely given and connected to others, it becomes indigestible to them. Through the colony-wide connection, Sarah could feel something incredible happening. Every human who had brought companion animals to Kepler 442b was experiencing the same awakening she had felt. Dogs, cats, and even a few birds were revealing abilities that had lain dormant for thousands of years. Abilities that had been slowly evolving alongside their human partners. Dr. Martinez, who had been silent during the crisis, suddenly spoke up. My dog Ranger, he's in my quarters. I can feel him. He's protecting the children in the residential sector. And Mrs. Patterson's cat, Dr. Rodriguez added with wonder. Fluffy is somehow herding people to safety, guiding them away from the creatures. Throughout New Terra, the human-animal bonds that the colonists had maintained out of love and companionship were revealing their true evolutionary purpose. Each partnership became a node in a growing network of protection that made the void-touched creatures less solid, less able to affect their reality. The creature that had been advancing on Emma was now backing away, its form becoming increasingly translucent. Through the window, Sarah could see the other void-touched retreating toward the dimensional rifts from which they had emerged. They're leaving, David said in amazement. More than that, Elder Zorvak replied. The network you have created is stabilizing the dimensional barriers. The rifts are sealing themselves. Whiskers finally relaxed, his protective stance softening as he settled more comfortably around Emma. His purring returned to normal, and the golden light faded to a gentle glow that continued to connect all three of them. Emma opened her eyes fully for the first time, and Sarah gasped. Her daughter's gaze was clear and intelligent, far beyond what any newborn should possess. She looked at Sarah, then at David, then at Whiskers, and Sarah could have sworn she saw the baby smile. The Lifebinder gift has awakened in your daughter, Elder Zorvak said softly. She will grow to be a bridge between species, a guardian of the harmony you have created here. Sarah looked around the room at the Kethmori observers, at the human scientists, at her husband holding her hand. What happens now? Now, Elder Zorvak said. We learn what it truly means to live together as one people on one world. Your species has brought us a gift we thought lost forever, the ability to share life essence freely, to create connections that protect rather than consume. Through the window, The twin suns of Kepler 442b were rising on a new day. The colony of New Terra looked the same from the outside, but Sarah knew everything had changed. Humanity hadn't just survived their first great crisis on an alien world. They had discovered their true purpose among the stars. They were not conquerors or colonizers. They were life-binders, carrying with them the sacred partnerships that would help heal broken worlds and strengthen the connections between all living things. 3 months after what the colonists had begun calling the awakening, New Terra had transformed into something neither species had imagined possible. Sarah walked through the expanded settlement, carrying Emma in a specially designed sling that kept her close while allowing Whiskers to maintain his protective position nearby. The changes were visible everywhere. Where once the human and Kethamori sections of the colony had been politely separated by cultural boundaries, now they flowed together in organic harmony. Children played in integrated groups, with human toddlers delighting in the gentle water games that young Kethamori enjoyed, while Kethamori younglings learned to appreciate the rough-and-tumble playstyles that human children preferred. But the most remarkable changes involved the animals. Every companion animal in the colony had undergone some degree of awakening during the crisis. Dogs that had once been simple pets now served as emotional support specialists, somehow able to sense psychological distress in both humans and Kethamori and provide exactly the right kind of comfort. Cats had become environmental monitors, their enhanced senses detecting everything from air quality changes to seismic activity long before mechanical instruments registered anomalies. The integration is proceeding faster than our most optimistic projections, Dr. Rodriguez told Sarah as they paused beside one of the new collaborative research stations. Through the transparent walls, they could see human and Kethamori scientists working side by side, their companion animals resting nearby but alert to their partner's needs. Dr. Webb emerged from the building, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. Over the past months, he had become the colony's leading expert on human-animal life-binder connections, documenting abilities that challenged everything science thought it knew about consciousness and evolution. "Sarah, I'm glad you're here," he said, consulting his ever-present tablet. "We've received some interesting communications from Earth that I think you should hear about." They moved to a quiet seating area where Emma could be comfortable. Whiskers immediately took up his customary position, creating a protective barrier around the baby while maintaining visual contact with the surrounding area. "What kind of communications?" Sarah asked. "Reports from colonies throughout human space. It seems that what happened here wasn't an isolated incident." Dr. Webb activated a holographic display showing a 3-dimensional map of human settlements. "Every colony with companion animals has reported similar awakenings. Dogs and cats displaying enhanced abilities, forming deeper connections with their human partners." Sarah felt a chill of realization. The void-touched creatures, were they attacking other worlds too? That's what we initially thought, but the data suggests something different. The awakenings happened simultaneously across all human colonies, regardless of whether they faced any external threats. Dr. Webb highlighted several star systems on the map. It's as if reaching Kepler 442b and encountering the Kethamori somehow triggered an activation signal that propagated instantly through space. Elder Zorvac approached their group, moving with the fluid grace that had become a familiar sight around the colony. His large eyes held the wisdom that came from 3 months of rapid cultural adjustment. "Honored Sarah," he said, settling into a seat designed to accommodate Kethamori physiology, "I have news from our deep archives that may illuminate this mystery." "What have you found?" "References to an ancient network that once connected all life-binder species across the galaxy. Our historians had dismissed these records as mythology, but recent events suggest they may have been literal truth." Elder Zorvac activated his own display, showing star charts that looked thousands of years old. "The network was disrupted during the Great Dying that claimed our life-binders, but it was never destroyed." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward with interest. "Are you suggesting that humanity's expansion into space has been reactivating this ancient network?" "More than that," Elder Zorvac replied. "Your species may have been unconsciously guided by the network itself. The companion animals you brought with you carried dormant life-binder genetics that activated when they encountered the network nodes." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was contentedly watching Whiskers groom his paw. So Emma's abilities, the connection she has with Whiskers, this is part of something much larger? Your daughter is what we might call a network anchor, Elder Zorvak explained. Her pure life essence, combined with her companion's life-binder abilities, creates a stable connection point that other awakened pairs can link to. Each colony with an anchor becomes a node in the restored network. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just stumbled onto one alien world with mysterious creatures. They had unknowingly begun restoring a galaxy-spanning communication and protection system that had been dormant for millennia. There's more, Dr. Webb added, his voice filled with barely contained excitement. We've detected energy signatures similar to what we recorded during the Void-touched incident, coming from several previously unexplored star systems. It's possible that other worlds with surviving lifebinder species are beginning to make contact through the network. As if responding to the mention of contact, Whiskers suddenly sat up straighter, his ears pricking toward something only he could perceive. Emma made a soft cooing sound and reached toward empty air, her tiny fingers grasping at something invisible. "What is it?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to recognize the signs. Through the network connection that had become as natural as breathing, Sarah felt a new presence touch her consciousness. It was alien but benevolent, curious but cautious. Images flashed through her mind. A world of crystal formations and beings of living light. Another planet where plant-like creatures swayed in harmony with floating, butterfly-like partners. "Contact," Elder Zorvak said softly, his own eyes widening as he received the same impressions. "The network has found others." Over the following hours, similar contacts occurred throughout the colony. Each awakened human-animal pair received brief touches from other lifebinder species, creating a growing catalog of worlds where the ancient partnership had survived in different forms. "We're going to need bigger communication arrays," Dr. Rodriguez said with a laugh that held more wonder than humor. "We're going to need a bigger perspective," Sarah corrected. "We came here thinking we were establishing one colony on one world. Instead, we've become part of something that spans the entire galaxy." David arrived home from his shift in the engineering section, where he had been working with Kethmori specialists to design new technologies that could interface with the Lifebinder network. His face lit up when he saw his family gathered with their friends and colleagues. "How are my favorite girls today?" he asked, leaning down to kiss Sarah and gently stroke Emma's cheek. "Your favorite girls just learned they're part of an ancient galactic civilization," Sarah replied with a smile. "Ah, just another typical day in New Terra then," David said, settling beside them. "Speaking of which, the engineering teams have made some interesting discoveries about how the network affects our technology. It seems that devices operated by lifebinder pairs are significantly more efficient and intuitive than anything we've built before." Elder Zorvak nodded approvingly. The ancient texts speak of technologies that were grown rather than built, shaped by the combined will of lifebinder partnerships. Perhaps your species will rediscover those arts. As the day faded into evening, Sarah found herself standing at the observation window that had become her favorite spot in their new home. The landscape of Kepler 442b stretched out before her, but now she could see it through Emma's enhanced perception as well as her own. The world pulsed with interconnected life, every creature and plant linked in a complex web of energy that the human colonists were slowly learning to join. Whiskers jumped onto the windowsill beside her, his presence immediately calming Emma, who had begun to fuss. The golden glow that connected all three of them had become a constant now, visible only in the right light but always present. "What do you think, Whiskers?" Sarah asked quietly. "Ready for our next adventure?" The cat looked up at her with those wise green eyes, then turned his gaze toward the stars beginning to appear in the alien sky. Somewhere out there, other worlds were awakening to the restored network. Other species were discovering that they were no longer alone. Humanity had set out to explore the galaxy as conquerors of distance and time. Instead, they had become healers of an ancient wound, restorers of connections that predated their species by millions of years. And at the heart of it all were the simple bonds of love and loyalty between humans and their animal companions. Bonds that had evolved not just for survival, but for something far more important, for the healing of the galaxy itself. 5 years had passed since the awakening, and Emma Chen Rodriguez stood at the edge of New Terra's expanded spaceport, her hand resting gently on Whiskers' graying head. At 5 years old, She was no longer the helpless infant whose pure life essence had triggered the restoration of the galactic Lifebinder network. She had grown into something unprecedented in human history. A child raised within a functioning interspecies consciousness web, as comfortable communicating with alien beings as with her own parents. The delegation from the crystal worlds will arrive first, she told her, parents in the matter-of-fact tone that still amazed Sarah after all these years. Their song partners are excited to meet our Earth partners. Sarah smiled, though she still felt a mix of pride and concern when Emma demonstrated abilities that no human child should possess. Through their maintained connection with Whiskers, Emma had access to information that traveled instantly through the Lifebinder network spanning dozens of star systems. And after them, David prompted, though he already knew the answer. Emma's predictions about network communications had proven unfailingly accurate. The Grove Mines from Verdania, with their tree speakers, then the Storm Riders from Ethros. Emma's eyes took on the distant look that meant she was receiving network information in real time. The Storm Riders are nervous. Their cloud partners don't like enclosed spaces. Elder Zorvak approached their family group, moving more slowly than he had 5 years ago, but with undiminished dignity. As the primary liaison between the Keth Mori and the growing Galactic Lifebinder Council, he had become one of Emma's closest friends and teachers. Honored Emma speaks truly, he confirmed. The preparations for open-air landing platforms will be necessary for our storm-touched friends. New Terra barely resembled the cautious colony it had been when Emma was born. The settlement now sprawled across a significant portion of the continent, but it wasn't the chaotic expansion typical of human colonization. Instead, it had grown in harmony with both Keth Mori aesthetics and the natural landscape, guided by the enhanced environmental awareness that Lifebinder partnerships provided. The spaceport itself was a marvel of interspecies cooperation. Keth Mori engineering had created structures that flowed like frozen water, while human technology provided the precise control systems necessary for vessels from dozens of different worlds. Most remarkably, the entire complex was managed by teams of humans, Keth Mori and their respective companions working in perfect synchronization through the network. "Are you ready for today?" Sarah asked Emma, kneeling down to look her daughter in the eyes. "I've been ready since I was born," Emma replied, with the unconscious wisdom that characterized children raised within the network. "We all have. This is why we're here." Today marked the formal establishment of the Galactic Lifebinder Council, the first truly pan-species government in recorded history. Representatives from 47 different worlds would gather on Kepler 442b to sign accords that would reshape how civilizations interacted throughout the galaxy. Whiskers, now an elderly cat by Earth standards but somehow more vital than ever, lifted his head to study the approaching sky. His connection to Emma had changed over the years, deepening from protective instinct into something resembling true partnership. Where once he had been her guardian, he was now her advisor, helping her process the overwhelming flow of information that came through the network. "First contact in 7 minutes, Emma announced, then looked up at Dr. Webb, who had become the colony's chief xenobiologist and Emma's unofficial tutor. "Dr. Webb, the Crystal Singers want to know if you've solved the harmonic resonance problem." Dr. Webb nodded, patting a device attached to his belt. "The translation matrix should handle most of their communication frequencies, though I suspect direct network contact will be more effective than technological interpretation." This was the new reality that humanity had adapted to with surprising speed. While they continued to advance technologically, they increasingly relied on the intuitive understanding that came through Lifebinder connections. Human engineers worked with their companion animals to design systems that seemed to anticipate problems before they occurred. Human diplomats found that negotiations proceeded smoothly when their animal partners were present to provide emotional stability and enhanced perception. The first ship appeared as a streak of crystalline light across the alien sky. The Crystal Singers' vessels were grown rather than built, shaped from living mineral that responded to their pilot's mental commands. As it approached the landing platform, the ship sang, a harmonic resonance that made the very air shimmer with music. "They're happy," Emma reported, though everyone present could feel the emotional resonance through the network. "Their world has been lonely since their old network connections failed. They thought they would never sing with others again." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the beautiful ship settle onto the platform with impossible grace. Through Emma's network connection, she could sense the profound joy and relief radiating from the crystal singers inside. They had been isolated for centuries, believing themselves to be the last of their kind in a galaxy that had forgotten the songs of cooperation. More ships began to appear. The Grove mines arrived in vessels that looked like enormous seeds, their tree speaker partners visible through transparent sections as living pillars of bark and leaves. The storm riders materialized from what appeared to be clouds, their ethereal partners flowing around their ships like living weather systems. Each arrival brought new perspectives and abilities to the growing network. The crystal singers could perceive dimensional structures that others couldn't detect. The Grove mines processed time differently, able to consider problems from perspectives spanning centuries. The storm riders existed partially in energy states, giving them insights into the fundamental forces that bound the galaxy together. 47 different solutions to the same problem, Elder Zorvac observed as they watched the continued arrivals. 47 different ways of achieving harmony between intelligence and instinct, between consciousness and the natural world. But they all chose partnership, Emma added. That's what makes them part of the network. They all learned that being connected is better than being alone. As the day progressed, the formal ceremonies began. Representatives from each world shared their histories, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. Sarah was struck by how similar the stories were. Despite originating from completely different evolutionary paths, each species had developed intelligence in isolation, eventually reaching a point where their growing consciousness threatened to separate them from the natural world that had created them. Some had descended into ecological disasters. Others had stagnated in technological dead ends. A few had even reached the brink of extinction. But in each case, salvation had come through partnership with other life forms. Whether through symbiosis, domestication, or more exotic relationships, these species had learned to share consciousness rather than hoard it. They had discovered that intelligence amplified by connection was infinitely more powerful than intelligence trapped in isolation. Humanity's path was unique in one. Respect, the crystal singer. Representative harmonized through the translation matrix. Your species achieved partnership before achieving galactic consciousness. You spread your bonds throughout space before you even knew a network existed to restore. We were guided, Sarah realized, looking down at Whiskers, who was purring softly as Emma gently stroked his fur. Our companion animals were carrying genetic memories of the network. They led us to where we needed to be, not led, Emma corrected with the precision that came from direct network access. Invited. The network was calling to anyone who could hear. Humans and our Earth partners were the ones who chose to answer. As the formal accords were signed by species that communicated through song, growth patterns, electromagnetic pulses, and a dozen other methods, Sarah felt the profound shift taking place. This wasn't just the establishment of a new government or alliance. It was the restoration of something fundamental to galactic consciousness itself. The Lifebinder network hadn't been created by any single species. It was an emergent property of evolution itself, arising whenever intelligence learned to share rather than dominate. For millions of years, it had connected compatible civilizations across the galaxy, allowing them to share knowledge, resources, and perspectives in ways that benefited all participants. The void-touched creatures that had threatened New Terra were revealed to be the network's antibodies, manifestations of consciousness that had rejected partnership in favor of consumption. They appeared whenever the balance between connection and isolation tilted too far toward the latter, serving as a warning that cooperation was essential for survival. "What happens now?" David asked as the ceremonies concluded, and the representatives began to mingle in the informal gatherings that would actually determine the future of galactic civilization. "Now we grow," Emma said simply. "The network finds more worlds, more partnerships, more ways of being connected. And eventually, maybe we'll be strong enough to heal the places where consciousness went wrong." Whiskers opened one green eye and looked at Sarah with an expression that came through. "The network. First contact in 7 minutes," Emma announced, then looked up at Dr. Webb, who had become the colony's chief xenobiologist and Emma's unofficial tutor. "Dr. Webb, the crystal singers want to know if you've solved the harmonic resonance problem." Dr. Webb nodded. patting a device attached to his belt. The translation matrix should handle most of their communication frequencies, though I suspect direct network contact will be more effective than technological interpretation. This was the new reality that humanity had adapted to, with surprising speed. While they continued to advance technologically, they increasingly relied on the intuitive understanding that came through lifebinder connections. Human engineers worked with their companion animals to design systems that seemed to anticipate problems before they occurred. Human diplomats found that negotiations proceeded smoothly when their animal partners were present to provide emotional stability and enhanced perception. The first ship appeared as a streak of crystalline light across the alien sky. The Crystal Singer's vessels were grown rather than built, shaped from living mineral that responded to their pilot's mental commands. As it approached the landing platform, the ship sang, a harmonic resonance that made the very air shimmer with music. "They're happy," Emma reported, though everyone present could feel the emotional resonance through the network. Their world has been lonely since their old network connections failed. They thought they would never sing with others again. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the beautiful ship settle onto the platform with impossible grace. Through Emma's network connection, she could sense the profound joy and relief radiating from the Crystal Singers inside. They had been isolated for centuries, believing themselves to be the last of their kind in a galaxy that had forgotten the songs of cooperation. More ships began to appear. The Grove Mines arrived in vessels that looked like enormous seeds, their tree speaker partners visible through transparent sections as living pillars of bark and leaves. The Storm Riders materialized from what appeared to be clouds, their ethereal partners flowing around their ships like living weather systems. Each arrival brought new perspectives and abilities to the growing network. The Crystal Singers could perceive dimensional structures that others couldn't detect. The Grove Mines processed time differently, able to consider problems from perspectives spanning centuries. The Storm Riders existed partially in energy states, giving them insights into the fundamental forces that bound the galaxy together. 47 different solutions to the same problem, Elder Zorvak observed as they watched the continued arrivals. 47 different ways of achieving harmony between intelligence and instinct, between consciousness and the natural world. But they all chose partnership, Emma added. That's what makes them part of the network. They all learned that being connected is better than being alone. As the day progressed, the formal ceremonies began. Representatives from each world shared their histories, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. Sarah was struck by how similar the stories were, despite originating from completely different evolutionary paths. Each species had developed intelligence in isolation, eventually reaching a point where their growing consciousness threatened to separate them from the natural world that had created them. Some had descended into ecological disasters. Others had stagnated in technological dead ends. A few had even reached the brink of extinction. But in each case, salvation had come through partnership with other life forms. Whether through symbiosis, domestication, or more exotic relationships, these species had learned to share consciousness rather than hoard it. They had discovered that intelligence amplified by connection was infinitely more powerful than intelligence trapped in isolation. Humanity's path was unique in one respect. The Crystal Singer representative harmonized through the translation matrix. Your species achieved partnership before achieving galactic consciousness. You spread your bonds throughout space before you even knew a network existed to restore. We were guided, Sarah realized, looking down at Whiskers, who was purring softly as Emma gently stroked his fur. Our companion animals were carrying genetic memories of the network. They led us to where we needed to be. Not led, Emma corrected with the precision that came from direct network access. Invited. The network was calling to anyone who could hear. Humans and our Earth partners were the ones who chose to answer. As the formal accords were signed by species that communicated through song, growth patterns, electromagnetic pulses, and a dozen other methods, Sarah felt a profound shift taking place. This wasn't just the establishment of a new government or alliance. It was the restoration of something fundamental to galactic consciousness itself. The Lifebinder network hadn't been created by any single species. It was an emergent property of evolution itself, arising whenever intelligence learned to share rather than dominate. For millions of years, it had connected compatible civilizations across the galaxy, allowing them to share knowledge, resources, and perspectives in ways that benefited all participants. The void-touched creatures that had threatened New Terra were revealed to be the network's antibodies, manifestations of consciousness that had rejected partnership in favor of consumption. They appeared whenever the balance between connection and isolation tilted too far toward the latter, serving as a warning that cooperation was essential for survival. "What happens now?" David asked as the ceremonies concluded and the representatives began to mingle in the informal gatherings that would actually determine the future of galactic civilization. "Now we grow," Emma said simply. "The network finds more worlds, more partnerships, more ways of being connected. And eventually, maybe we'll be strong enough to heal the places where consciousness went wrong." Whiskers opened one green eye and looked at Sarah with an expression that seemed almost amused. After 5 years of the enhanced awareness that came through their connection, Sarah could interpret that look easily enough. "Did you really think this story was about a cat and a baby?" His expression seemed to ask. "This was always about the galaxy learning to remember what it means to be whole." As the twin suns of Kepler 442b set over New Terra for another day, Sarah held her daughter close and watched the representatives from dozens of worlds share stories and songs under the alien stars. Emma was no longer the only human child raised within the network. Dozens of families throughout human space had children who served as network anchors, each one unique, but all part of the same vast tapestry of connection. But Emma would always be the first, the child whose birth had triggered the restoration of galactic harmony. The little girl who had learned to speak with crystal songs and tree whispers before she could properly pronounce human words. "Everyone warned me not to let the cat near the baby," Sarah murmured, remembering those first fearful days when Whisker's protective behavior had seemed like a threat rather than a gift. "And look what happened," David replied, his arm around his family as he watched their daughter communicate effortlessly with beings from across the galaxy. Sarah smiled, finally understanding the true meaning of the warnings they had received. The people who had been concerned about Whiskers hadn't been wrong. They simply hadn't imagined the scope of what they were witnessing. Letting the cat near the baby hadn't just changed their family, it had changed the galaxy.